Hey, welcome back to Meet the Middle, coffee in a cocktail bar. I'm here with Jason Thorne from former City of Hamilton, Director, Chief of Planning. I've followed your work and now you've moved on. So I'm going to let you tell a bit about that story. But yeah, super stoked you're here in Calgary and able to join me, man.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. I've been a fan of your work and I followed your work for a while. So it's nice to do this.
It's great to hear, man. Well, tell us a bit about yourself and your journey and kind of where you've landed. And
I've just made a change. So I spent the last 10 years as the head of planning and development at the City of Hamilton, which was a fantastic experience, and got to be at Hamilton in an amazing time in its history in terms of just the growth and the revitalization and the energy that's really started to happen in Hamilton. So loved my time there and made the decision just a few weeks ago now to actually make the shift. I came from actually private practice before I went to the City of Hamilton. So now I've gone back into private practice. And I've taken on a role with Stantec, one of the biggest sort of integrated design, planning, engineering firms in the country. And my role is I'm leading across Canada. I'm leading what they call their urban places sector. So it's the sector within Stantec focused on urban work, on managing urban change, solving very sort of complex urban issues. So a lot of what I was kind of doing in Hamilton, and now I kind of get to try to work on that kind of thing across the country. Yeah,
super, super fascinating. I've obviously followed your work in Hamilton. Hamilton is such an interesting place, obviously, with the growth of Toronto and the pressures of housing there. I feel like it kind of exploded. Tell us a bit about that journey for you in Hamilton and all the tremendous things you've been able to do there from an urban perspective and even housing perspective. It's been quite impressive.
It has been, over the 10-year period that I was there, it really changed what kind of my focus was, what the focus of my department was, what the focus of the city was to kind of, initially go back 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of activity happening in Hamilton. I like to use the stat, I think it was the year 2013, maybe just before I got there, the total number of residential units built in downtown Hamilton was one.
Wow.
Not one building, one unit. Crazy. So probably somebody put in a basement apartment or something like that. And that was the housing production for downtown Hamilton for that year. And then, so early days, a lot of our effort was around just trying to attract investment. So we did a lot of roadshow to Toronto, talk to some, developers and builders there, our own kind of Hamilton development industry, trying to kind of encourage investment and interest in building housing in Hamilton, especially in the older parts of the city, the downtown core. City put on the table a whole host of financial incentives, tax increment grants, incentives for brownfield cleanup, heritage grants, zero interest loans, all sorts of financial incentives to try to kind of kickstart things. And it worked because, suddenly we had a lot more housing getting built. We started to hit record levels of housing, not just citywide, but the amount of that housing that was being done through infill and intensification as opposed to greenfield, that whole market just shifted. And we went from, again, if I go back 10 years when I first got at the city, it was maybe 40% of new housing was infill intensification, 60% greenfield, thereabouts. My last year at the city in 2023, it was 90% infill and intensification.
Wow.
That's a massive shift.
Huge.
And then you see the same shift between how much of that housing was single detached housing, went from being maybe 2/3 to maybe 10-15%. So that's not in 10 years sometimes sounds like a long time, but in the development world, that's not a big chunk of time. And just this massive shift happened. But then there was there was the downside of all of that. There was the affordability issue, and Hamilton was actually one of the hardest hit, most impacted by affordability because income's not keeping up as much with the cost of housing. So, initially, housing affordability was a bit of our competitive advantage in the region. We were one of the cheaper areas where you could get housing in a really good urban context at a reasonable price. That got more and more challenging. So now the issues are less around, notice us investors as a potential market. This is a great place to invest. Yeah. Trying to address the challenges of housing affordability. And then also in the past, just more recently, the last year or so, We're now starting to see that downturn that every city across North America is starting to see in terms of housing production starting to fall off for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, those stats are phenomenal. When I think about it, even in our city right now, like 80%, 90% of our growth is new growth versus, the established areas regrowth that we've been trying to tilt that balance. And the target is by 2030. And it's been that target for a long time to get to 50-50. And so the fact that you guys...
That was our target wasn't much higher than that. So we kind of blew the target over the water. 90% was amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's funny, like obviously, housing affordability, that level of growth in such a short amount of time changes the fabric of your community and of your city. So do you guys know, do you track what percentage of folks from Hamilton would be commuting into the city of Toronto? And was that what you were seeing that was starting to really shift?
It's a bit, it was growing. It's there's a perception that Hamilton's a bedroom community, but when you look at the stats, it's actually not.
Okay.
So, the last stats I saw, these would be a couple of years old now, but of the people who commute in Hamilton, we would see numbers, something like about 15% would go to Toronto. The vast majority of commuters in Hamilton were either staying within Hamilton or maybe going to like Burlington or, maybe Oakville. So, close within the region.
Yeah.
Now that every year that out commuting was growing bit by bit, but it's certainly not the kind of numbers you see in like a Brampton or some of those more near Toronto municipalities where you could have easily 50% or more of your commuters are actually going into downtown Toronto. So yeah, it's shifting, and of course, introducing much more frequent GO rail service from downtown Hamilton to Union Station makes it a little more attractive and a little more possible to be a commuter. But it's I often heard that about like Hamilton being a bedroom community, and the numbers don't bear it out.
Yeah,
and it is. I always kind of think of it as like it's a city on its own. I mean, yes, there's a huge relationship with the juggernaut of Toronto. But Hamilton's its own city and always has been.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'd never been to Hamilton until recently. A few years ago, I was telling you about my pal Aleem owns Shorty's Pizza, one of my favorite pizza places. So I always go by it when I'm around. He's in Winnipeg too now, which is awesome. But I was like pleasantly surprised by the fabric of Hamilton and, the heritage character, the main streets. Like it was really pleasant to kind of walk. And so talk to me a bit about the transformation that you start to see. Like I know the downtown pier was starting to happen and a lot of that is starting to, how do you identify and keep some of the original character that you love about your community, but also, welcome the growth that was needed from a housing perspective?
Yeah, and it always is a bit of a tension. There's a lot of really valuable heritage buildings in Hamilton. I've always been a champion of retaining as much of that as possible, but I've never been a champion of like, okay, everything just has to be frozen in time. Yeah. Like there's a lot you can do around repurposing and adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. And I actually think it's one of the things that Hamilton has done really well. I've kind of joked a couple of times that if there's a Hamilton architectural vernacular, it's adaptive reuse, and it's finding interesting and creative ways to incorporate heritage elements into new development. And in the downtown and in the Hamilton's city of several downtowns, because it's an amalgamated city. So if you look into the downtown Dundas, downtown Ancaster, you see the gamut of everything from like, okay, something that may have had some historical heritage value being fully demolished and rebuilt, everything all the way to like full retention and repurposing and everything in between. Some of it is facadism. I know some people criticize facadism. It can be done very well. I've seen it work really, really well. We've had projects where it was fully demolished, but we asked the developer to retain the original brick and facade and to reconstruct as part of development. And there's a couple of those that actually look beautiful. And if you were to walk by them today, you wouldn't be able to tell, oh, that facade once came down and was reconstructed. You can't tell.